Hey, this is Joe with Grow It Build, and today I'm going to tell you all about wild bergamot. If one of your goals in your garden is to attract wildlife to your yard, particularly pollinators, then you really need to consider growing some wild bergamot. This flower has a very unique appearance that looks almost like some kind of tropical exotic alien, but I find that the lavender blooms swaying back and forth on a windy day it's really relaxing and almost hypnotic. And also, this plant is absolutely tough as nails. You can see it growing in ditches, growing in places where there's not many other plants, and it's tough enough to compete with some of the most aggressive plants out there. But this video will be a complete profile on this flower, including what it is and why you should grow it, physical description, identification, growing conditions, growing from seed, saving seed, wildlife it can attract, uses, and then we will review. So I hope you stay with me on this video, as it's really one of the easiest native flowers to grow, and it really does bring in a ridiculous amount of pollinators to your yard. Okay, so let's have a look. Okay, so what is it? Well, wild bergamot is a perennial wildflower native to most of North America. Scientifically, it's known as Monarda Fistulosa. It's a member of the mint family. It will grow 2 to 4 feet tall in optimum conditions of full sun and well-drained soil, and it's going to bloom for roughly 4 weeks in the summer, and it will attract numerous pollinators. Now, I do want to talk about what it is not. And what I mean by that is that common names often get interchanged with different species, and wild bergamot is often referred to as bee balm. So let's take a look at another plant that's called bee balm, and we'll try to look at some differences here. If we do a side-by-side comparison of Monarda Fistulosa, which is wild bergamot, the profile for this video, and red bee balm, which is Monarda didyma, which I've also done a video on, you might have already seen. But let's look at some differences. The first obvious one is Monarda didyma has dark, rich, deep red blooms, while bergamot has lavender, kind of pinkish, purplish blooms. The flowers also bloom at different times, as Monarda didyma, the red one, will bloom a little earlier, kind of in late spring, whereas wild bergamot is more of a midsummer flower. They might overlap a little bit though. And also the soil conditions that they like are different, although there's overlap, but the red one will take more moist soil, whereas the lavender one, wild bergamot, subject of this video, will take drier soils, more drought tolerant. And finally, they will spread differently in that wild bergamot is more of a clump-forming plant and will spread by seed here and there, whereas the red bee balm will send rhizomes all over the place. And I wanted to just bring this up because a lot of times when people say bee balm, when you start interchanging common names on different species, it can get very confusing. So this pink flower you see here, this is what we're going to be talking about. It's scientifically Monarda fistulosa, and it is known as wild bergamot. Now, if you see a plant that looks like this at a big box store or a garden center, you really need to check the label. A lot of times they'll call it bee balm, and it might be this, it might be the other, Monarda species I talked about. You just have to read the label. And if you do see an X after the Latin name followed by something else, then it's definitely not a straight species. It's a hybrid or cultivar of some kind, which isn't necessarily inherently bad, but you should just be aware of that and know that sometimes they don't attract as many pollinators. Okay, so why you should grow it? Well, wild bergamot will bring in huge amounts of pollinators, tons of bees, butterflies, hummingbird moths, and hummingbirds too, but to a lesser degree. My patch of bergamot is ridiculously busy from dawn until dusk with scores of bumblebees, skippers, and a variety of butterflies. A cut flower. Wild bergamot will make an excellent cut flower for bouquets or vases if you like to do that sort of thing. The long stems and long bloom time make it a good one. Deer and rabbit resistant. If you're looking for a native plant that deer and rabbits will not eat, then wild bergamot is a no-brainer. As a member of the mint family, the leaves and stem have a strong oregano-like aroma. Once it's established, I've never seen any damage to wild bergamot. It is a beautiful flower. The blooms of wild bergamot are gorgeous to look at. They are truly exotic looking, and I think they belong in a rainforest, not on the prairies and ditches of North America. But they also seem to stand up very tall and sturdy throughout any storm in my experience, and they're generally one of the most maintenance-free plants around. Okay, we're going to get into physical description and identification, but before I do, If you guys are enjoying this content, please give me a thumbs up. It really does help my channel out, and I really do appreciate it. Okay, so physical description and identification. So in general, the plant is going to grow 2 to 4 feet tall and have a spacing of 2 to 3 feet with a tight cluster of stalks that'll be blooming on top. Now, that's in the optimum conditions. If you have it in shadier areas, it's not going to get 4 feet tall, it'll be a little less, so on and so forth. The stalk of wild bergamot will be square or 4 sharp angles on it, as it's a member of the mint family. They're going to be light green to purple in color and smooth and hairless. You might have some branching in the upper third of the plant, and that's because they're just going to be putting blooms out from those. The leaves are going to be opposite or paired along the stem. Each pair will be rotated 90 degrees from the previous. Their general shape is lanceolate or ovate, and they're going to be about 3 inches, maybe 4 inches wide by half as wide. So, usually 1.5 by 3 or 2 by 4. The flower heads are going to be 1 to 3 inches in diameter and pink to light purple or lavender in color. Blooming is going to last for about 1 month in midsummer. Blooms will start in the center and work their way to the outside as blooming progresses. So here's a younger bloom that's more tightly clustered, and here's one that's just about done, and you can see how it's just an outer ring of individual flowers. And the individual flowers on a bloom are tubular and about 1 inch long with 2 petals. The lower petal hangs down like a mouth or a tongue. Okay, so the root system is going to be deep branching roots that will help with its drought tolerance. And it's going to have clump forming rhizomes, so the clump should expand each year. You can probably divide it every 3rd, 4th, or 5th year. I have never even bothered doing that though, and everything still looks pretty good. But it should not be sending rhizomes all over your yard, as seeds are the main way that the plant propagates itself. Okay, so we're going to get into growing conditions now, and before I forget, this entire video does exist as an article at our website. I will link to it below at growitbuildit.com. So if you need a quick reference later, just go to that, bookmark the article, and yeah. Okay, so for growing conditions, when it comes to sunlight, wild bergamot is a prairie plant. It's going to grow best in full sun, which is at least 6 hours of direct sunlight per day. It can take partial sun, which is 4 to 6, but it will not be as tall or showy. For moisture, it's going to do best in medium moisture to dry soils that drain well. So if you're unsure how well your soil drains, I'll put a card in the top right. You can see how to test it. But the deep roots will allow it to be very drought tolerant. So it's okay in dry sites. It's okay right out in the open on a slope in the full sun. It's pretty easy that way. And for soil, this plant can grow in just about any kind of soil. Sandy, clay, loam, doesn't really matter. It seems to find a way to grow. I've read that if the soil is too nice, like if it's really rich, black, organic soil, you may get a floppy plant. And that's be new to me. I've never had a plant flop over in all the years I've grown it or seen it growing, but it's generally growing in poor soil. So there you go. There are a couple of other things I want to talk about with the plant that are kind of problems or could be considered as problems. But like other members of the Monarda genus, powdery mildew can occur on wild bergamot, and you can plainly see it on my plants. I have decent airflow, I have full sun, but I always seem to get it. Now, it doesn't really hurt the plant, so to speak. It's not going to kill it. It's just cosmetic. But if that's a big issue to you, there are fungicides and other things you can try to do to mitigate it. But in my experience, it's just going to get it. The next thing is that this can be an aggressive spreader in terms of seeds. Not overly aggressive. It's not like goldenrod or something like that, or obedient plant, but wild bergamot is going to spread by seed, and it's a large plant, so it's not hard to control by just pulling unwanted seedlings though. And finally, yellowing leaves. So this is common to a lot of native plants, but lower leaves will often turn yellow and kind of fall off as the growing season goes on. Some people say it's due to drought. I kind of think this is my speculation, but I'm thinking that the lower leaves just aren't getting as much sunlight, and so rather than maintain the leaf, the plant just sheds it on its own. Why maintain a leaf that's not producing any food from photosynthesis? Okay, so let's get into how to grow it from seed. Wild bergamot is one of the easier flowers to grow from seed. The seeds require absolutely no pre-treatment whatsoever. They also need light to germinate, so there is no planting depth, so to speak. Just fill a container with moist potting soil, leaving a small gap at the top. Tamp it kind of firm, sprinkle seed on top, and press it in with your thumb. Don't bury it, just press it in. In my experience, the germination rate is always very high with this. Place the container where it's going to get morning sun and afternoon shade, and only water it with a spray bottle or a mist, some kind of misting, so you don't accidentally wash away seed and bury it on accident. Germination should occur within a couple of weeks or so. And this is what the seedlings look like. When it comes to saving seed, I've done an entire video on this, which I'll link up to the top right, but it's really easy with wild bergamot. The seed heads do a good job holding the seed, so you really just need to go out there about a month after blooming and cut dried seed heads, put them in a bag, let them dry out for another week, and then shake the bag up and dump it all through a kitchen strainer to separate some chaff. And you can store the seed for a year or two in an envelope or a Ziploc bag if the seed's truly dry. And as far as how fast to establish this from seed, by year 2 you should get some blooms. This is a second year plant you're seeing right here with this little hummingbird moth. By year 3 it should pretty much be full grown or mostly to its full size. So it's pretty quick to establish. So if you thought you wanted, 5, 10 of these plants, just buy a pack of seeds for $2.50, start them, and by the second year you're going to start getting blooms. By year 3 you're going to have full grown plants. I will link below to where you can buy the seeds, so check down there. This is what wild bergamot looks like when it emerges in the spring. You can see the purplish leaves. Okay, let's get into wildlife. When I said that this is really one of the busiest flowers I had in my backyard, meadow, prairie, it really is. It's absolutely crazy with bees and skippers, and it will bring in larger butterflies and some hummingbirds as well. And if you grow enough of it, you will start attracting hummingbird moths. These are really cool little insects. They are in the sphinx moth family, but most moths feed at night, but this one will feed during the day like a hummingbird, and it often gets mistaken as a baby hummingbird, which it's not. But I can go back there anytime when the plants are blooming and pretty much find one feeding. It's really cool. Also, wild bergamot is host to caterpillars of the gray marble moth and hermit sphinx moth. For deer and rabbits, like I mentioned earlier, deer and rabbits never bother my plants once they're established. But if you're putting small seedlings in, or if you're growing them from seed, you may want to protect them from liquid fence that year. Liquid fence really does work, and I find that if it's a new plant that the deer has never seen before, even if it's one they inherently hate, they may taste it the first year. Alright, so for uses of wild bergamot, for garden uses, it's pretty versatile in that you can put it in like a manicured flower bed, or a border or a wildflower garden. And you can even grow it in a container and it will survive year after year. What you see right here, this plant has been in this container for 2 years. And it sat outside in the winter in very cold temperatures in zone 6, and it survived. So this is a plant that could be grown in a container, although it's probably going to get fairly tall. Now, the biggest issue you would face in using this in a formal landscape is you're going to want to layer it with similar height plants or place other perennials or flowers that will get maybe half its height. That way, when it does start to shed its lower leaves, you won't notice it, or if it does get powdery mildew, it won't be as noticeable. And you could probably just have it without having to treat it or anything. I mean, personally, I wouldn't worry about it at all, but that's me. There is a ton of companion plants that would work with wild bergamot in any garden as well. For some that would bloom at the same time and look really nice would be like anise hyssop, liatris, false sunflower, purple coneflower, gray-headed coneflower, and the cup plant. For other perennials that would work with this, that would bloom before or after, you could try lanceolea coreopsis, butterfly weed, any number of asters. This thing is so versatile and tough that it can basically grow with almost anything. And finally, this plant is edible. The leaves can be used as a garnish in salads, raw or cooked, and they can also be used to make tea. Stem, flowers, and leaves can also be used as seasoning in like soups or stews. I have not tried this, but I can definitely tell you that the foliage has a it really smells like oregano, and you can really tell when you're like saving the seeds from this plant, you'll smell oregano very strongly. So Okay, so it was also used medicinally by the Native Americans quite heavily. There was over 70 uses of wild bergamot by 21 different tribes. All sorts of symptoms were treated with this plant. From they were using it as a tea or an infusion, or just rubbing the flowers on their skin to treat like boils and such. But some of the uses was as a cold remedy, a cough medicine, a diuretic, emetic, eye medicine. It was very widely used. I have most of these medicinal uses summarized at the bottom of my article that I'll link to below, and have their link to their sources as well. All right, so let's review. Wild bergamot will grow roughly 4 feet tall in full sun and well-drained soil. It's very drought tolerant. It is tough as nails and very versatile. It's absolutely great for pollinators. It's very easy to grow from seed, one of the easiest in my opinion. And it's very versatile in the garden and will bring in so much wildlife you will thank me for growing it. So that's all I have for this video. If you guys have enjoyed this, please give me a thumbs up, as that really does help me out a lot. And if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. I do like trying to answer them. And check out the article if you need a quick reference later. And yeah, you guys all have a good one. I'll talk to you later.